When a man uncovers the mysterious death of his grandfather, he embarks on a dangerous quest to expose a long-buried military secret. As he digs deeper, he discovers not only hidden alliances and global espionage, but also shocking betrayals that threaten everything he holds dear. Now, with enemies closing in from all sides, he must choose between the truth and his own survival. Thomas Bradley sat in the dimly lit attic of his late grandfather's home, surrounded by the clutter of old boxes, fading photographs, and dusty records. His hands trembled as he sifted through a stack of yellowed documents that had been tucked away for decades, hidden in plain sight. These were the last pieces of a puzzle he had never known existed, a puzzle that, once completed, would forever alter his understanding of his family's history. His grandfather, James Bradley, had passed away just 2 years ago. An unassuming man, James had always been a quiet figure in Thomas's life. No war stories, no heroic tales of his time in World War II. Thomas had always known that James had served, but his grandfather had never spoken about the war, never mentioned the missions, the danger, or the sacrifices. His medals were tucked away in a drawer, his military records locked up tight in a file cabinet. To the outside world, James Bradley was nothing more than an ordinary man who had lived an ordinary life. But now, in the silence of this dusty attic, Thomas was beginning to realize that the man who had been his role model, his quiet hero, might not have been so ordinary after all. As he flipped through the papers, a series of faded photographs caught his eye. The first image was a group photo, a group of soldiers standing outside a military base, their faces serious, their posture rigid. James was in the center, his uniform impeccable. But it wasn't the image of his grandfather that stood out. It was the other faces around him, some unfamiliar, some barely recognizable from the distant past. These were faces that Thomas had never seen before, and one in particular seemed to hold a certain intensity, a sharpness in the eyes that didn't belong in a wartime photograph. Curious, Thomas began to examine the accompanying documents. The file contained fragments of a mission brief, one that seemed far too classified for the typical soldier's personal belongings. The mission was labeled Operation Shadow, a name that meant nothing to him. There were coordinates, names of foreign intelligence officers, and cryptic references to a covert operation that had been marked as top secret, something that was meant to remain buried. Thomas's heart raced. What was this? Why had his grandfather never mentioned it? And why were these records hidden away like some dark secret? His fingers flipped through more papers, and he found a series of letters, some addressed to his grandfather, others written by him in a hurried, almost frantic hand. The letters described a mission in the final months of the war, something called the silent extraction, a plan to retrieve high-ranking scientists who had worked on Nazi technology. But there was more, a mention of betrayal, a shadowy figure within the Allies' ranks, someone who had sabotaged the operation, leading to the deaths of several operatives. The word betrayal echoed in his mind, its weight heavy. Could this be true? Had his grandfather been involved in something far more dangerous, far more complicated than anyone had ever known? Was this why James had never spoken of his time in the war? Had he been trying to bury something so explosive that it had never been spoken of, even to his family? As Thomas continued to read, one name jumped out at him repeatedly: William Garrett. Garrett, a name that seemed to be tied to every document, every mention of sabotage. Who was he? What had he done to his grandfather and the mission? Why was Thomas only hearing about this now, so many years later? The realization hit Thomas like a lightning bolt. His grandfather wasn't the quiet, unassuming man he thought he was. James Bradley had been part of something much larger, something that had remained hidden for decades. And if James had been involved in a secret operation that had been sabotaged, there were far-reaching consequences that no one had ever spoken about. Thomas's mind raced. Who would he trust with this information? What if the world already knew and the government had merely covered it up? But that didn't explain the secrecy in his grandfather's files. No, Thomas realized this was bigger than anything he could have imagined. This was a story, his grandfather's story, that demanded to be uncovered, and he would be the one to uncover it. But as his thoughts raced forward, another realization dawned on him. He wasn't the only one interested in these documents. Someone else, someone powerful, was watching. His phone buzzed suddenly, shaking him from his thoughts. A single message blinked on the screen. A digging in dangerous places. Stop before it's too late. Thomas stared at the message. It was anonymous, but the words were clear. Someone knew what he was doing, and they didn't want him to continue. In the distance, the wind howled outside, rattling the windows of the old house. The air felt heavy, oppressive, as if something was about to shift in the world around him. Thomas stood up, his heart pounding. His grandfather's secret had been uncovered, and it was far more than he had bargained for. But the message was clear. There were forces at play, forces that didn't want the truth to come out. The first move had been made. Thomas couldn't stop now. His grandfather's legacy, the mission that had been buried for so many years, was at the heart of a conspiracy that reached far beyond anything he could have imagined. His next steps would lead him into a world of espionage, betrayal, and danger. He could no longer walk away. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but there were more questions than answers, and far more people who would kill to keep the truth buried. He grabbed the stack of documents, stuffing them into his bag, and left the attic, determined to find the truth no matter the cost. It was a crisp autumn evening when Thomas Bradley found himself standing before the weathered gravestone of his grandfather, Michael Bradley. The man, a decorated war hero in World War II, had passed away nearly a decade ago, but it was only recently that Thomas had begun to uncover the secrets buried with him. Secrets that had remained hidden for over half a century. Thomas hadn't expected much when he had first come across the box of old letters and photographs in his grandfather's attic. His curiosity had been piqued by a letter his grandmother had handed him just before her death, a letter from the Department of Defense, addressed to his grandfather. It was marked with the ominous words, "Declassified, top secret." The letter, never mentioned before, seemed out of place among the family mementos. As he read the contents, his heart began to race. His grandfather had been involved in something far more dangerous than Thomas could have ever imagined. It was more than just the story of a young man sent to Europe to fight against Nazi forces. It was a story of betrayal, cover-ups, and covert operations that his family had been kept in the dark about. According to the letter, Michael Bradley's final mission, which ended in his disappearance in 1944, was not the straightforward reconnaissance mission the family had been told. It was an extraction mission, one that went horribly wrong. The letter described how Michael had been part of a secret operation to extract valuable intelligence officers and scientists from Nazi-controlled areas. His plane had crashed under mysterious circumstances, and the official story was that he had died during a reconnaissance mission. The military had declared him MIA, presumed dead, but now Thomas was starting to question everything. His grandfather had been involved in something bigger, a web of intrigue and espionage, far beyond what had been passed down to him as family history. With this new discovery, Thomas set off to dig deeper. He contacted the archives at the National Defense Intelligence Agency, requesting access to his grandfather's service records. What he uncovered was a series of encrypted documents, military communications, and reports, many of which were flagged as confidential or top secret. It was clear that Michael Bradley's death had been no accident. His mission, labeled as Operation Blackout, had been compromised. Not only had the mission failed, but the lives of those he had been sent to protect had been put in jeopardy, and worse, someone from within their ranks had betrayed them. But as Thomas delved further into these records, he began to feel a creeping sense of dread. It wasn't just history that he was uncovering, it was a mystery still very much alive. Someone didn't want him to know the truth. One late evening, while poring over the final details of Operation Blackout, Thomas's phone rang. It was an unknown number, but something about the urgency in the voice on the other end sent a chill down his spine. "Mr. Bradley," the voice crackled through the line, "we know what you've found. You need to stop digging, or you'll put yourself and your family in danger." Thomas's breath caught in his throat. He instinctively knew the voice was not a threat from his government, but something darker, more covert. Someone who had been watching, waiting for the right moment to silence him. "Who is this?" he asked, his voice steady despite the growing tension in his chest. "Let's just say we're the ones who've kept your grandfather's secrets for over 60 years, the voice continued. "You won't get far. The people who are still alive from that time, they don't want the truth getting out. If you don't stop now, the past will come back to haunt you, and we won't be as kind as we were with your grandfather." The call ended abruptly. Thomas sat there, frozen, the weight of the warning pressing heavily on his shoulders. It was no longer a matter of uncovering a family secret. He was now entangled in a web that stretched far beyond anything he had ever imagined. And someone was willing to do whatever it took to make sure the past stayed buried. That night, Thomas couldn't sleep. He paced the small apartment, thinking about the implications of what he had just learned. Who was behind this? Was it a government agency? A rogue faction from the war? And why had his grandfather been so deeply involved in something that had remained hidden for so long? The following morning, after hours of restless thought, he decided to take the next step. He had no choice. If he wanted answers, he had to confront the past and the shadows that still lingered around it. He packed a bag, made a reservation for a flight to London, and began arranging a meeting with the only person who might know more, Lieutenant Colonel Edgar Sharp, an elderly man who had worked alongside Michael Bradley during the war. Sharp had retired to a small village in the English countryside, and though he was in his late 80s, he had maintained a low profile for years, never discussing the war in public. But Sharp was also one of the last people who might have answers to the questions that haunted Thomas. After all, the lieutenant colonel had been present during Michael Bradley's final mission. He knew the truth, or at least he knew a part of it. As Thomas boarded his flight to the UK, a new sense of urgency began to grow within him. He wasn't just pursuing a family mystery anymore. He was now on the trail of secrets so dangerous that there were people, likely powerful people, who would stop at nothing to keep it hidden. And those same people would come after him, just as they had come after his grandfather, if he got too close. In the days to come, Thomas would discover that the shadows of the past were not just a relic of history. They were alive, watching, and very much present. The flight to London felt long, but as Thomas Bradley descended into Heathrow, his resolve strengthened. He was about to meet Lieutenant Colonel Edgar Sharp, a man whose name had been whispered in connection with his grandfather's mysterious death during World War II. Sharp had been part of the secret operation his grandfather, Michael Bradley, had been involved in. The mission that had supposedly gone wrong, and yet had remained shrouded in secrecy for decades. The meeting took place in a quiet cafe in the outskirts of London. Sharp was waiting, older now, but still sharp-eyed, his military demeanor softened by years of silence. The years had not diminished the air of mystery around him. Thomas could feel it, the weight of history in the room. Sharp was about to reveal things that had been buried for decades. "Mr. Bradley," Sharp greeted him, his voice rough but warm. "I've been expecting you." They sat, ordered coffee, and for a few moments, the world outside the cafe seemed far away. Sharp, a man with years of wartime experience, had always kept his distance from the past. But now, with Thomas sitting across from him, Sharp could no longer remain silent. "Your grandfather wasn't just another pilot," Sharp began, his voice low and filled with regret. "He was part of a classified mission, a joint operation to extract intelligence officers and high-value targets from German-held territory. But there was a problem." Thomas leaned in, his pulse quickening. "What kind of problem?" "Betrayal," Sharp replied grimly. "Someone within our ranks tipped off the Germans. They knew when and where the mission would take place. Your grandfather's plane was shot down, not by enemy fire, but because someone inside the operation had leaked the details." Thomas recoiled, his heart pounding. "So, someone from within the mission?" Sharp nodded. "Yes. And your grandfather wasn't just killed in a reconnaissance mission. He was betrayed by someone he trusted. The Germans knew about the operation before we even launched it. And when Michael's plane went down, he was captured. They tortured him for days." Thomas struggled to keep his composure. The official story of his grandfather's death was a lie. He hadn't died in the line of duty. He'd been betrayed. "What was he protecting?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Your grandfather carried something crucial," Sharp continued, his voice thick with regret. A list of names. Names of intelligence officers and operatives who had critical information about the German intelligence network, and, more importantly, about the traitor inside our ranks. That document was never recovered. The air in the cafe seemed to grow heavier. Betrayal from within, a hidden document that could expose a conspiracy. This was no ordinary war story. "I need to find that list," Thomas said, his voice steady. "Who betrayed him? Who is responsible?" Sharp's face grew grim. "The list has been lost. It's buried, sealed away by the very people who want to keep it hidden. You're not the first one to search for it, Thomas. Many have tried, but they were silenced." Silenced? The gravity of Sharp's words hit Thomas like a blow. This was bigger than just finding a missing document. Someone powerful wanted this truth to stay buried. "I don't care how dangerous it is," Thomas replied, his resolve hardening. "I will find it." Sharp sighed deeply, as if he had seen this determination before. "Your grandfather was just as stubborn. But be careful, Thomas. The truth always comes at a price." As Thomas left the cafe, his thoughts were a whirlwind. The deeper he went into the past, the more dangerous it became. Someone didn't want him to uncover the truth. But Thomas had no choice now. The hunt had begun. The search for answers took Thomas across Europe, each destination unraveling more mysteries. His next lead was in Brussels, a city steeped in history, and the location of one of the few surviving members of the operation, Frederick Dufresne, a former resistance fighter. He had been a part of the secret mission during the war and had supposedly witnessed the events surrounding his grandfather's capture. Thomas found Frederick living in a modest apartment, far removed from the grandeur of his earlier life. The years had been hard on him, and the weight of old secrets seemed to hang over his frail figure. He agreed to meet Thomas only after he had been convinced of his genuine intentions, and when they finally sat down, the atmosphere in the room felt tense, as if the air itself remembered the past. "I knew your grandfather," Frederick said, his voice raspy, eyes clouded by decades of memories. "We were supposed to get him out, you know, but things went wrong, terribly wrong." Thomas leaned forward. "What happened?" Frederick's eyes darkened as he stared at the table between them. The mission was meant to save lives, high-ranking officers who knew too much. The Germans had infiltrated our ranks. They were always one step ahead of us. But they got your grandfather and the list. "What list?" Thomas asked urgently. "The names," Frederick replied, lowering his voice to a near whisper. "Your grandfather had a list of operatives, people who were involved in intelligence work, but also people who were compromised. There was a mole, a traitor who fed information to the Germans." "Who was the mole?" Thomas demanded, his heart pounding. Frederick shook his head, his expression one of sorrow. "I don't know. I only know that once your grandfather was captured, the list disappeared. But I saw it. It was supposed to be handed off to a contact. That was the plan. But the contact never got it." Thomas asked, trying to connect the dots. "No," Frederick replied, shaking his head again. "And after that, after they killed Michael, I couldn't trust anyone. The mole was still out there, but I couldn't expose them, not without being certain." Thomas felt a cold chill run down his spine. The betrayal was deeper than he had thought. It wasn't just about finding his grandfather's death. It was about uncovering a conspiracy that had survived for decades. The mole was still out there, and someone was willing to kill to keep that secret buried. Frederick reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn, yellowed envelope. "This is the last thing your grandfather wanted you to see," he said, sliding the envelope across the table. "I don't know what's in it, but it's important." Thomas picked up the envelope with trembling hands. He could feel the weight of history in it. Without another word, he opened it carefully. Inside was a small photograph of a man in a dark coat, standing in front of a nondescript building. The image was blurry, but Thomas could make out the unmistakable outline of the building. A facility on the outskirts of Berlin, one that was long believed to be abandoned. "Who is this?" Thomas asked, staring at the photograph. "That man," Frederick said, "is the key. He was involved in the operation, but no one knew what side he was on. He was there that day, but he disappeared after the mission went south." Thomas's heart raced. "Where is this building?" Frederick hesitated for a moment before answering. "It's in Berlin. The facility, the one we were trying to infiltrate. It's still there, hidden in plain sight. Thomas's thoughts swirled. The man in the photograph, the facility, it was all too much to ignore. The mole, the betrayal, the lies, it all pointed toward something bigger, something much darker than just a single death. I have to go to Berlin, Thomas said, standing up. I have to find out who that man is and what really happened. Frederick nodded solemnly. I warned you, Thomas. You're not the only one searching for answers. The people who were involved in this, they've been keeping the secret for decades, and they'll stop at nothing to keep it buried. The warning echoed in Thomas's mind as he stepped out into the cold evening air. He had no idea what awaited him in Berlin, but he was determined to find the truth. His grandfather's death was no accident. It had been part of a much larger operation, one that was still ongoing. And Thomas was about to dive headfirst into a web of lies, betrayal, and danger, one that could cost him everything. Berlin felt like a city of ghosts, its skyline a jagged silhouette against the darkening sky. Thomas stood at the edge of the old district, where the walls of history were as much a prison as a testament to the past. The building Frederick had pointed to, the one in the photograph, was just up the street, a forgotten relic, standing tall amidst modern constructions. But something about it felt off. The streets were empty, save for the occasional car, and the windows of the building were dark, its purpose unknown. Yet Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He crossed the street, keeping his gaze low, careful not to attract attention. His mind was racing. What was in that building? What secrets did it hold? He reached the entrance and paused, glancing around. There were no signs, no markings. The door was locked, but a small, inconspicuous keypad next to it suggested a way in. Thomas had no idea what he was about to walk into, but he had little choice. The answers he sought lay within these walls. With steady hands, he accessed the encrypted contact information Frederick had given him. As the lock clicked open, he stepped inside, feeling the coldness of the place wrap around him. The interior was dark, save for a few dim overhead lights. He cautiously moved forward, his footsteps echoing in the silence. There was a door at the end of the hall, slightly ajar. Thomas reached for the handle and paused. Something wasn't right. The air in the corridor felt stale, almost suffocating, as though it had been sealed off for years. With a deep breath, he pushed the door open. Inside was a small room, cluttered with old files and paperwork strewn across a desk. A sense of abandonment hung in the air. But it was the large file on the desk that caught his attention. Thomas moved closer and opened it. Inside were maps, photographs, and a series of names. Names that all seemed to be connected to high-level espionage operations during the Cold War. The files detailed intelligence exchanges, covert missions, and military assets, many of which were marked with top secret and eyes only. One document stood out. A name, Blackbird. His heart raced. This was the same alias Frederick had mentioned. It had been the code name for a senior officer involved in the operation, the one who had betrayed them all. But the document wasn't just a record of his involvement. It was a direct link to an ongoing network of spies, an international conspiracy that had operated for decades. Before Thomas could examine it further, he heard a noise from behind him. A low, deliberate sound, like a door opening. Panic surged through him. He was not alone. He spun around to face the doorway, but it was too late. 3 figures stood in the hallway, their faces obscured by shadows. They were dressed in dark clothing, their movements controlled, almost methodical. Thomas instinctively reached for his phone, but one of them, a tall man with cold, calculating eyes, stepped forward, his voice calm but threatening. "You've been digging in places where you shouldn't be, Mr. O'Connor." "Who are you?" Thomas demanded, his heart pounding in his chest. "We've been keeping an eye on you." "Too many questions, too much interest in things better left alone," the man said, his tone unervingly calm. "You're digging into matters that concern people far beyond your understanding. And those people don't like their secrets exposed." The words hung in the air, thick with threat. Thomas's mind raced. He needed to act fast. He wasn't sure who these people were, but they were dangerous. He could see it in their eyes. They were connected to the conspiracy, and they would stop at nothing to protect it. "I'm not leaving here without the truth," Thomas said, his voice firm despite the fear gnawing at him. The tall man smirked. "That's exactly the problem. You think the truth is worth dying for." Before Thomas could react, one of the figures lunged toward him, but Thomas was ready. He kicked out, knocking the man off balance, and in a swift motion grabbed the nearest object, a heavy metal paperweight, and swung it at the second figure's head. The impact knocked him down, but the tall man was already moving, drawing a gun from inside his jacket. Thomas barely dodged the shot, his heart racing. He was outnumbered, but he wasn't going to give up without a fight. Adrenaline surged through him, sharpening his focus. He dashed toward the door, pushing it open, and sprinted down the hall. A bullet ricocheted off the wall beside him, but he didn't stop. He could hear footsteps behind him, growing closer, but he pushed himself harder, knowing he had no choice but to escape. The exit was ahead. He could almost taste freedom, but just as he reached the door, a sharp pain shot through his side. He stumbled, but he didn't fall. With everything he had left, he kicked the door open and burst into the night air, barely aware of the pain coursing through his body. Thomas stumbled into the street, gasping for breath. He didn't know where he was running, but he didn't care. His only focus was on escaping, on surviving long enough to uncover the truth about the conspiracy that had cost his grandfather his life. He reached a small alley and ducked into the shadows, clutching his side as the blood began to seep through his shirt. His mind raced, but his body was beginning to fail him. He needed help. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was Frederick. "Thomas, listen to me carefully," Frederick's voice crackled through the line. "You're in deeper than you think. The people you're dealing with, they're not just ordinary operatives. Blackbird's network is vast. You can't trust anyone, especially not the people who are supposed to be helping you." Thomas took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "I know, but I've seen the documents. I have proof." "No, Thomas, you don't understand. The proof you have, they'll come for you. They'll come for anyone who knows the truth." "I can't stop now," Thomas replied, his voice strained. "I'm already in this too deep." Frederick's voice was full of urgency. "You have to leave Berlin. Go. Now. It's the only chance you have." Thomas didn't hesitate. He stumbled back to the street, blending in with the shadows as he made his way to the safe house Frederick had arranged for him. The fight was far from over, and now he had a new enemy, one that had been lying in wait for decades. The truth was closer than ever, but so was the danger. Thomas spent the next few days in hiding, each hour feeling like an eternity. Every moment was fraught with tension, his mind constantly working to stay ahead of those who were now hunting him. The evidence he had uncovered was irrefutable, a chilling trail of deceit, betrayal, and government cover-ups. The files he had sent to the journalist were set to expose the truth, but they were only a fraction of the whole story. He had learned that the conspiracy went far deeper than he ever imagined. The deeper he dug, the more dangerous the game became. International agents, some familiar faces, some new, seemed to be everywhere, closing in on him from all directions. The network Blackbird had woven over decades wasn't just about wartime betrayals. It was alive and well, operating in the present day, influencing governments, intelligence agencies, and corporate structures. There were too many people whose careers and lives depended on the lies remaining hidden. And then there was the final twist, the discovery that his own family was not only involved but also deeply enmeshed in the very conspiracy he was fighting to expose. His grandfather's death, once thought to be the tragic loss of a young soldier, now appeared to be part of something far larger. The puzzle pieces clicked into place with painful clarity. His grandfather had known too much, uncovered too much, and was eliminated because of it. Thomas, more determined than ever, decided he would no longer hide. He would confront the very heart of the operation, take the final step, and make sure that the truth came to light, no matter the cost. He arranged a secret meeting with a trusted international journalist, someone he knew could be trusted to handle the explosive material responsibly and ensure its publication without interference. The meeting was set for the dead of night in a secluded alley in Berlin. As the journalist took the files from his hands, Thomas knew this was the moment. He had done all he could. He had passed the torch. But just as he was about to walk away, he saw a figure in the distance, a tall, familiar man. The very man who had been hunting him from the beginning. "You're too late," Thomas said, his voice trembling with a mixture of defiance and exhaustion. "The truth is already out." The man stepped closer, his eyes cold and unwavering. "Not yet," he replied in a low, chilling voice. "We'll see about that." Before Thomas could react, there was a sharp sound, the unmistakable click of a gun being cocked. He had nowhere to run. The man's shadow loomed over him as he took the final step, gun aimed directly at his chest. Tom seemed to slow. For a brief moment, Thomas thought of his family, of the sacrifices made, and the truth that was now out there for the world to see. The shot rang out, and the world faded to black. Thomas had died, but the truth had not. The journalist, trusted with the files, ensured they were published, and the world saw what had been hidden for so long. The consequences were immediate. Government scrambled to address the fallout. Blackbird's network, long thought dormant, was exposed for the world to see. The web of betrayal that had stretched across generations began to unravel. But Thomas's death was not in vain. The truth had been ignited, and the consequences would be felt for years to come. The shadows that had protected the conspirators for so long were now pierced, and nothing would ever be the same. The world would never forget Thomas's sacrifice. The fight for the truth was far from over, but it had been given new life, because sometimes it takes a tragedy to ignite a movement that can never be stopped.